You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Turning our attention to Washington, D.C., where Republican lawmakers are still working on passing President Trump's signature piece of legislation, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It's a budget reconciliation bill focused on extending his first-term tax cuts, boosting defense spending and immigration enforcement, and cutting some spending, including from Medicaid. There's been a lot of attention on the price tag of the OBA, as I'm calling it. If passed, it would add an estimated $2.5 trillion to the national debt over the next decade, according to the Congressional Budget Office. But today we're going to talk about how it would cut into benefits for millions of Americans, specifically federal food stamp assistance programs. OBA is on track to slice hundreds of millions from SNAP. About 10% of people in Washington state receive SNAP benefits. The Washington State Standard estimates tens of thousands in the state could lose federal food aid if the bill passes. We're going to talk about that with Executive Director of the Rainier Valley Food Bank in just a moment, and how SNAP cuts could change things for their clients. First, for an update on where things stand with the bill right now, I'm joined by Orion Donovan Smith. He's a legislative reporter with the Spokesman-Review. He's based in Washington, D.C. Orion, thanks for being here. It's always so good to have you on the show.
Hey, Libby, thanks for having me.
So let's first just get the basics. When it comes to food assistance, how would this bill affect things?
Yeah, so first, the bill that the House passed already would cut about $300 billion from SNAP spending from now until 2034. Now, the Senate is in the process of revising that legislation in different ways. And just yesterday, they put out their own set of proposals for SNAP cuts that would shave off about $211 billion, according to the Senate Republicans themselves. That would be about a 20% cut to SNAP overall, whereas the House cuts would be closer to 30%.
Senate Republicans are looking at tweaking, as you mentioned. So where is this in the course of actually being passed, Orion? What are the next steps for where this bill would go from here?
Well, so if the Senate passes a bill, we know it would be different from the bill the House already passed. That means it would have to go back to the House and would need to get through there once again. It passed with an incredibly tight margin by just a single vote in the House with no Democratic support and a few Republicans voting against it. So what Senate Republicans are trying to do now is revise the bill in such a way that they can get enough support to pass it. They only need a simple majority, unlike most legislation that faces a filibuster and a 60-vote supermajority requirement. So they still need to get almost all Senate Republicans on board. We know some of them are not likely to vote for the bill for various reasons. And so it's a tough needle to thread on the Senate side, and then it would have to go back to the House side and pass there as well.
This bill would shift a lot of extra funding and price tag for food benefits onto the states. What's the argument for that move?
I mean, fundamentally, the argument is Republicans in Congress would like to cut federal spending to offset additional spending and tax cuts that are the centerpiece of this legislation they're trying to pass. Just for some context, SNAP only accounts for historically between 1% and 2% of federal spending, so it's not a big chunk of that money. By comparison, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security together represent something like 44%, close to half. So this is not a big pot of money that they're trying to scoop some out of to help pay for these other priorities. But that's the plan. And of course, the other thing that Republicans in Congress are arguing is that states need to be responsible about how they use these resources. And they're targeting specifically states with high error rates, which is to say they either underpay or overpay people those benefits.
Democrats are against this bill, of course. Here's Representative Pramila Jayapal talking with us on Sound Politics last month about her opposition.
I said this is one big, beautiful betrayal of the working class, of poor people. It is literally the largest transfer of wealth from working people and poor people to the millionaires and billionaires that we have ever seen in history.
So you mentioned this bill did pass the House with pretty slim margins, Orion. What about Republicans, especially local Republicans here from Washington state, like our two members of Congress on the right, Representative Dan Newhouse and Mike Baumgartner from Eastern Washington, from where you're covering things in the Spokesman-Review? Have they said anything about these cuts and why they support the bill?
Yeah, so Congressman Michael Baumgartner from Eastern Washington and Congressman Dan Newhouse from Central Washington have both voted for the bill in the House. They generally say that they're in favor of what they call sensible spending cuts and reforming entitlement programs like Medicaid and SNAP, this food aid. Um, it's important to note, though, that those two congressmen represent the districts in the state of Washington that are most dependent on SNAP. In the fourth district, that's Dan Newhouse's Central Washington district, about 18% of households rely on SNAP, according to the latest USDA data. And that number is over 16% in the fifth district of Eastern Washington. Now, this kind of gets at this tension that Republicans in Congress are dealing with. They are really now finding themselves having to contend with the demands of what you might call the traditional Republican power base, which is businesses and wealthier people who like tax cuts for big companies and for high earning Americans. And on the other side, the fact that the Republican Party is really increasingly the party of the working class. We see that in terms of just who turns out to vote, and the fact that these, the two most Republican-leaning districts in the state are also the two most dependent on both Medicaid and SNAP, is telling. And so they're facing this tough decision. And I have to say, neither of those congressmen has been forcefully arguing for these SNAP cuts, but they have supported the bill.
House Speaker Mike Johnson says he wants this done by the 4th of July. Do you think that's feasible?
These members of Congress always like setting these somewhat arbitrary deadlines for themselves.
They like to go home on recess, Orion. You know this.
It helps if there's a federal holiday and they want to go home. There has been talk of Senate Majority Leader Thune actually keeping senators in town through that recess if they can't get it done before July 4th. But really, the more real deadline lawmakers are facing is the so-called X date. That's the date by which Congress needs to raise the nation's borrowing limit, the debt ceiling, to avoid defaulting on the nation's debt. Now, we don't know precisely when that would happen, but Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said it was likely sometime in August. And because Congress likes to go home for August, they are certainly trying to get this done before the end of July.
Orion, I mentioned at the top that a lot of attention has been paid on this $2.5 trillion that the bill would, in current form, add to the national debt over the next 10 years. There are budget hawks still that remain in the Republican Party and in Congress. Over the next few weeks, as this thing's getting hammered out between the Senate and the House, do you expect any of that wing of the party to have any effect on the way that this bill finally gets passed, if it does?
There are a few Republicans in Congress who are likely to hold out based on their concerns about the debt. In fact, I'm here at the White House now, and President Trump is just speaking and kind of jokingly referred to Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky as the hardest vote to get and somebody he, is likely not to get. So there's an understanding that some of those fiscal hawks are likely to vote against the bill because it would add to the debt. But most Republicans overwhelmingly are arguing that contrary to what the Congressional Budget Office says, contrary to even what a lot of right-wing think tanks and budget analysts are saying, that this bill would not actually add to the deficit and the debt. Now,
how do they get that math going? I'm not sure how that works out.
Well, essentially what they argue is that this bill would cause such stunning and virtually unprecedented economic growth that the nation's gross domestic product would grow dramatically, and that would essentially erase that deficit. Now, again, it's important to say that virtually every economic analyst, independent, left wing, right wing think tanks in DC that follow this, and former congressional staffers I've talked to say that's absolutely unrealistic. Republicans point to the projections by the Congressional Budget Office after the 2017 tax cuts and the fact that revenue was higher than expected. But that's largely can be explained by the COVID-19 pandemic and the inflation that came with that, and higher revenues that resulted.
Orion, anything else you're going to be following here before we let you go?
I think the key question here is just how much Republicans, will nearly all Republicans be willing to go along with this bill, even if they have some concerns with it. I've been talking this week with a lot of Republicans at the Capitol. Some of them will admit that they have, a concern here or there with the bill. And a lot of them, including both Congressman Baumgartner and Congressman Newhouse, who we talked about from Eastern and Central Washington, have told me that, this is not a perfect bill, but they pitch it as a step in the right direction. They like the idea that it would cut, some spending on programs like Medicaid and SNAP, this food aid. And they say that as sort of bending the spending curve in a more responsible direction. And ultimately, whether or not this bill passes is up to those Republicans going along with it. And it's I think, increasingly being seen as an up or down vote on Trump's agenda. And so that's what they're going to have to say yes or no to.
And I think Democrats will continue to say you can't really bend that spending curve without looking at the revenue side of the picture and taxes. Orion Donovan Smith, legislative reporter with the Spokesman-Review based in D.C. Really appreciate your reporting, as always. Thank you, Orion.
Thanks, Libby.
So as you heard from Orion, there are a couple different versions of this big, beautiful bill, OBA package out there. The House version passed, cut $300 billion from SNAP food benefits for Americans. The Senate version, as it stands so far, would cut about $211 billion. The likelihood is that the final version will fall somewhere in between those two proposals. To talk about the local impacts of what this could mean for your neighbors here in the Seattle area, I want to bring in Gloria Hatcher-Mays, the executive director of the Rainier Valley Food Bank in Southeast Seattle. She's been listening on the line to Orion's reporting. Gloria, thank you very much for being here. And first of all, did anything stand out to you as you were listening to Orion talk about the way this is being talked about in the halls of Congress?
Yes, and thank you so much for having me. One thing that's notable is that the frame of reference for the conversation in DC seems to be around impacts to the budget deficits or potential savings they could get through these cuts. But they don't tend to talk about the impacts that these types of cuts would have in terms of their impact on people. And so I really want to make sure that we're mindful that nationwide, the rate of food insecurity has been steadily increasing. In fact, in Washington state, 9.5% of Washingtonians are classified as food insecure. And that is an increase year over year from 2023 to 2024. We don't have data yet for 2025, but my guess is that number may continue to rise. So I think it's really important. While I think that we as a nation need to make sure that we can pay all of our bills, we also need to be sure that as a nation we're caring for all people. And that's where my food bank comes in, and that's why I have to pay attention to that kind of data, because it means that it's going to have an impact on our ability to make sure that we have enough food to go around based on the demand.
And what do you expect the impact of federal cuts to be for the people you serve at the Rainier Valley Food Bank?
Well, we think it's going to be significant. A lot of people are not aware that most food banks have a budget line item for actually purchasing food that we do distribute out to the community. And currently, we are already in six figures for that. So our budget for 2025 has been $650,000 that we're spending out over the course of the year. And with the cuts that are already forecast that are going to hit this year, we feel like that's going to climb to up to $1 million. And that means that we have to source that money from somewhere. And it's very, very difficult in this environment where we're seeing people lose their jobs through layoffs and whatnot to really forecast that that money is going to be accessible to us. So if we are not able to backfill those federal dollars, it means that we might not be seeing that money come in to meet the demand that we're seeing in our food banks for clients who need to be served.
You mentioned that there were already some cuts you were contending with. Where did those stem from? Because this bill that we're talking about, the big, beautiful bill, the OBA, has not actually passed yet. What are the cuts you're dealing with already?
There's been some cancellation in grants and funding that were already allocated for fiscal year that begins basically on the federal schedule later this year. And so we're anticipating that because those dollars are not going to be available to us, that we'll have to backfill those dollars somehow. There is a program through the WSDA at the state level. It's a program that allows us to access funds to purchase produce and food items from local growers and providers. And those dollars are going away. So we know that we're going to have to find a way to make sure that we can meet the demand somehow. And we're just now in the process of doing some planning work around how that's going to be possible.
Can the state step in here and help at all? Are you hearing anything from state legislators?
The state has done a really good job with their budget this year to look at the issue of food insecurity and try to maintain the level of requests that have been put through their state organizations that provide backstop services for food banks and food bank programs. And so we are optimistic on that level, that even in light of the fact that the governor has said that we are suffering from revenue shortfalls as well, that they are trying to hold the line on that regard and maintain levels to us. But we know that that's not going to be 100%. So we need to do everything that we can to make sure that there are no gaps, that we close any gaps that do arise. But we are fairly pleased so far with the budget as it's been forecast and signed by the governor for the remainder of this year.
What can you tell us about who comes to the food bank these days? Is there anything you can share about the types of folks that you serve, and just to give people a better idea of what these cuts actually mean?
Yeah, I think that many people might be surprised at the folks that do come and use food bank services and the types of services that food banks offer. Like, the core of what we do is really about getting food where it needs to go. But we also do a lot of social service programming as well. So to be specific in answering your question, we see a lot of working poor families that come to the food bank. These are folks that have oftentimes more than one job, and they come to us for support in helping their household budget stretch a little farther because of the cost to them of trying to buy enough groceries to last them through the month. We also have a lot of folks that are elderly that use food bank services. We have a home delivery program that serves people who can't get to us on their own. We serve about 750 households through that program each week. We also, I'm going to expand a little to talk about our partnership with the Seattle Public Schools. Surrounding Rainier Valley Food Bank are a lot of schools that have a high percentage rate of students who are on the free and reduced lunch program. And for those students, what we offer is what we call a backpack program, which supplies them with food stuff that they can eat over the weekends, so that if they don't have enough food in the house, they're still sustained until they come back to school and can access the programs that are offered to them at school for food provision. If these cuts that are proposed in the big, beautiful bill go through, they're going to tie the free and reduced lunch program to the change in eligibility that they're putting in place for SNAP beneficiaries. So we're really concerned that that's going to mean that more students will lose their benefits of receiving free and reduced lunch at school. And so that's going to provide an impact to us again that we have to cover in terms of a gap we'd fill.
When you say eligibility, do you mean work requirements?
Yeah, we mean work requirements. We also mean that they're looking at how utility costs determine whether or not people would be able to qualify for SNAP benefits, which means that probably up to 90,000 Washington households would be affected by that and could lose their benefits. So equally then, if there are children in that household, they would no longer qualify for free and reduced lunch. So we're expecting to see a significant impact there.
If people are listening to this is the largest food bank in South Seattle, by the way, and they are concerned about their neighbors. What can they do to help, Gloria?
You know, the best thing that they can do to help is to offer support, even if they can only give $5. If they could give that $5 on a monthly basis to their local food bank, it's very meaningful because it's revenue that we can count on. And it takes some stress out of the planning for, again, how we would go about making sure that we have enough funds to continue offering services at the level that we currently do. And another way to really help is to volunteer. We always need the support of community members who have the time and the capacity to come and help us deliver on the promise of getting food where it needs to go. And we use about 75 to 150 volunteers every week to do deliveries for our home delivery program, to pack those grocery bags for that program, and to also make lunches for our lunch program that we give to folks who are unsheltered. And we distribute about 100 to-go lunches every single day that we're open, Monday through Friday. So it is very meaningful to connect yourself to your local food bank and be of service. And it has a huge impact in terms of our ability and our capacity.
You know what I'm not hearing from you, Gloria, is a whole lot of folks lining up at the food bank who sit on their couch or, want to take advantage of maybe taking it easy and getting food assistance. But that is the attitude that you hear when we talk about cuts to SNAP, is that, we need to add more work requirements. We need to make sure that people aren't basically mooching off the system. If somebody feels like there's a lot of fraud or waste going on in this system, what would you say to them?
I would say that I would like us to think about food in terms of a right that we all have as human beings. And it's not something that we should promote as a scarce opportunity. Instead, what we do at Rainier Valley Food Bank is live in abundance. So even when I'm talking about the fact that these federal cuts are going to have a huge impact on us, we're not living in the notion that we're not going to be able to do this. We are going to find a way. And we don't believe that people come to the food bank because they're trying to scam a system. We believe that they come to the food bank because they're hungry and they want to feed their families. And that tends to be what's demonstrated when we have the ability through our home delivery program to visit with them at home, that we're not finding that they have a Lamborghini in the driveway and they just want to use the food bank to make their payments on their car. It really is not a system that works in that way. And we also find that there's a large number of people who probably could benefit from our programming who are stigmatized by the fact that they might have to go to a food bank for food. So it's really not as it's being characterized in general media or in the federal discussion about this, that it's people who don't want to work. It's people who don't want to be creative in solving their issues relative to food insecurity. It's people who know that we are offering this benefit and this resource because we can and we want to, and it's available to them. And we want that mindset to take hold.
Gloria Hatcher-Mays with Rainier Valley Food Bank, and that is RVFB, rainiervalleyfoodbank.org. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.